What the Study Says.
All right, welcome back to What the Study Says. Today we are taking a deep dive into something incredibly common, something probably most of us are doing right now. I'm talking about sitting. We've compiled this great stack of sources, research papers, systematic reviews, some big meta-analyses, all digging into the science of sedentary behavior.
Yeah, it's a really comprehensive set. These papers give us a solid look at the latest evidence, on how spending a lot of time seated or lying down with very low energy output actually impacts our health.
Exactly. So our mission today for this deep dive is to cut through maybe some of the confusion and figure out what these specific sources really tell us. What's the science say about how sitting affects us? Is it bad just because we're not exercising enough, or is there something else going on? And really importantly, what practical things can we pull directly from these papers to, make better choices?
It's definitely a topic that's quite literally hitting us where we live, so to speak.
Haha. Yeah, I like that. Okay, let's unpack this then. First off, these sources, they make a very clear point about what sedentary behavior actually is. What's the sort of fundamental definition they're working with?
Okay, so they define sedentary behavior as any waking activity that's characterized by really low energy expenditure, specifically 1.5 METs or less. And this is while you're sitting or reclining or lying down.
METs.
Right.
Metabolic equivalent.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
It's a measure of how much energy you're using compared to just, sitting quietly at rest. So 1.5 is barely above resting level.
Got it. Super low energy, very little movement while your body's supported. And you mentioned this is critically different from just being physically inactive. That distinction really jumped out at me too.
Absolutely. That's a key point these sources really emphasize. Physical inactivity is simply not meeting the recommended physical activity guidelines.
Yeah.
Not getting enough moderate to vigorous exercise. Sedentary behavior is distinct. It's not just the opposite end of the exercise spectrum.
Right.
You can be very active. You could hit the gym, meet all the guidelines, but still be highly sedentary for the rest of your day.
That's the aha moment, I think, for a lot of people. You might be a runner or go to classes, but then you sit at a desk for 8 hours, maybe commute sitting down for an hour, watch TV for a few hours.
Precisely. And that adds up.
Yeah.
And the research here confirms this is pretty common. These sources cite data showing adults average somewhere between 6 to 8 hours of sedentary time per day.
Wow.
And for older adults over 60, that number actually creeps up even higher. We're talking 8.5 to 9.6 hours on average. And importantly, the sources also note that people who are more physically active don't necessarily sit less than those who are, less active.
Okay, so it's really widespread and it's its own thing, separate from just not exercising. What's the big picture impact then? What do these papers say about the health consequences of all this sitting and physical inactivity?
Well, the overall picture they paint is, frankly, quite stark. One source highlighted data going back to 2008 that linked physical inactivity alone to over 5 million deaths worldwide.
5 million?
Yeah, which puts its impact pretty much on par with smoking and obesity at the time.
Good grief.
And across these sources, insufficient physical activity is repeatedly identified as a kind of underappreciated primary cause for many, if not most, of the chronic diseases we're dealing with today.
And sedentary behavior specifically, the sitting itself separate from not exercising enough.
Right. Sedentary behavior on its own, according to multiple sources here, is increasingly and strongly associated with a higher risk of non-communicable diseases.
Yeah.
Things like heart disease, diabetes, some cancers, and also just overall mortality, dying sooner.
Okay, so the sitting itself seems problematic. Does how you accumulate that time matter? Is it just the total hours clocked in the chair, or is it like sitting for long, uninterrupted stretches?
Yeah, that's where some of these sources get into the finer details of what they call sedentary behavior patterns. They look at concepts like prolonged sedentary time, which is basically the total amount of time spent sitting, and also sedentary bout duration.
Bout duration.
Yeah.
So how long you sit each time before getting up.
Exactly. How long each continuous chunk of sitting lasts.
Okay, and what did they find about those patterns? Do long bouts matter more?
The evidence presented here suggests that, yes, both the total amount of prolonged sedentary time and having longer individual bout durations are linked to worse health outcomes. Some sources even provide specific support suggesting that a sedentary bout lasting around 30 to 60 minutes seems to be a kind of threshold where the risk starts to increase significantly.
Ah, okay. So just the simple act of breaking up that sitting time seems important then, getting up every half hour or hour.
That's a key recommendation that comes through, yeah. It's echoed in guidelines and supported by some of the evidence presented here. Interrupting those longer stretches of sitting, especially those over 30 to 60 minutes, appears to be beneficial.
Is there a tipping point, like a total daily amount of sitting where things get really bad based on these papers?
The sources do suggest a dose-response relationship. Basically, the more prolonged sedentary time you accumulate, the higher the risk seems to get. Pinpointing an exact universal threshold is tricky, as it seems to vary a bit depending on the specific health outcome they were looking at, heart disease versus mortality or whatever. But one really striking finding cited was from a study showing the risk of all-cause mortality dying from any cause nearly doubled when total prolonged sedentary time went over about 672 minutes per day.
672 minutes, let me think. That's, about 11.2 hours a day. Okay. Right, this brings us to the really interesting question, I think. The one a lot of listeners probably have. If you are someone who meets the exercise guidelines, maybe you work out hard, you get your steps in, do those hours you spend sitting the rest of the day still pose a risk? Is sitting truly an independent risk factor, or does exercise kind of cancel it out?
Yeah, this is definitely one of the more complex areas these sources tackle. And the picture isn't perfectly black and white. It kind of reflects that the research is still evolving here. The papers suggest that high levels of physical activity can substantially reduce, or in some cases, even seem to eliminate the risk associated with prolonged sitting, at least for certain outcomes.
Okay, so exercise helps a lot.
A huge amount, yes. But some findings also hint that extremely high levels of prolonged sitting might still independently increase risk, even for people who are otherwise physically active.
So exercise is like a massive protective shield, but maybe it's not a magic bullet that makes sitting all day totally harmless.
That seems to be the nuance emerging, yeah. One source highlights that the negative effects of sedentary time, looking at things like all-cause mortality again, were significantly greater for people with low levels of physical activity compared to those with high levels,
right,
which strongly supports that buffering effect of exercise. But the question of whether prolonged sitting is an additional risk factor, totally independent of your total sedentary time, that's still being fully worked out. Partly because, not all studies perfectly control for the total sitting time when they're looking just at the long bouts.
That makes sense. It's complicated to isolate, so it sounds like being active is absolutely your best defense, but probably still wise to pay attention to the sitting, especially if it's for really long stretches. Okay, let's dive into the specifics then. What actual health problems do these sources link to sedentary behavior? What parts of the body or conditions are affected?
It's quite a broad list, actually, that the papers detail. Let's start with cardiovascular health. Sedentary behavior is pretty clearly identified as a risk factor here. It's linked to increased risk of getting cardiovascular disease and also dying from it. And they specifically highlighted connections with things like TV viewing time and just general hours spent sitting. The research points to links with increased diastolic blood pressure, that's the bottom number or lower levels of the good HDL cholesterol. And interestingly, these links seem to hold up even when researchers account for things like obesity and how much other physical activity people do.
Wow, okay.
Yeah, and one source flat out states that inactivity is a primary cause of at least 1 in 3 deaths from coronary heart disease. They also mention a link between sedentary behavior and deep vein thrombosis, blood clots.
Right. Okay, what about metabolic health and weight?
Sedentary behavior is tied to gaining more abdominal and visceral fat. That's the fat deep inside around your organs.
A dangerous kind.
Exactly. And the sources explain that this type of fat is metabolically active and can lead to chronic inflammation throughout the body. Inactivity itself is noted as a primary cause of both accumulating that visceral fat and just overall obesity. And sedentary behavior is also associated with a higher risk of metabolic syndrome, which is that cluster of conditions like high blood pressure, high blood sugar, unhealthy cholesterol level.
Got it. And insulin resistance and type 2 diabetes?
Inactivity is described as a primary driver in muscles losing their sensitivity to insulin, which is, the key step towards type 2 diabetes. But the good news highlighted here is that lifestyle changes, especially ones that increase physical activity, are shown to significantly reduce the risk of actually developing type 2 diabetes in people who are already pre-diabetic.
That's encouraging. Okay, how about musculoskeletal issues? Bones, muscles, joints, pain.
Yeah, a sedentary lifestyle is identified as a risk factor for neck pain. One finding suggested an odds ratio of 1.5.
Meaning 50% higher risk.
Roughly, yeah. About 1.5 times more likely to report neck pain if you're sedentary. Interestingly, some specific activities while sitting showed even stronger links in some studies. Like mobile phone use was linked with an odds ratio of over 2 so more than double the risk of neck pain. Computer use was around 1.3. The link with just general sitting time was a bit less consistent across studies, maybe around 1.33. And one analysis found the link was only marginally insignificant for office workers as a whole, but it was significant for university students. So maybe how you sit or what you do while sitting matters too.
Interesting nuance.
Definitely. And beyond pain, inactivity is listed as a primary cause of bone loss, specifically in the weight-bearing bones, which contributes to osteoporosis. And for muscles, skeletal muscle inactivity can lead to atrophy, muscle wasting, decreased muscle mass overall, getting fatigued more easily, and even problems with mitochondria, the energy factories in your cells. They also mentioned that in patients who already have rheumatoid arthritis, more sedentary time was associated with worse disease scores, more pain and fatigue, and just reduced physical function.
Okay. And brain health. That's a big concern for many people.
Yes, the sources link physical inactivity to cognitive decline, dementia, and Alzheimer's disease.
Oh, wow.
But on the flip side, higher levels of physical fitness and activity are associated with positive outcomes, like increased brain volume and better markers of overall brain health.
So moving is good for the brain, sitting isn't.
That's the strong suggestion, yeah. And then finally, they mentioned some other conditions. Things like an increased prevalence of breast cancer, estimated around 25% higher in the least active groups compared to the most active. Associations were also noted with erectile dysfunction and some potential links to preeclampsia during pregnancy. Inactivity is also implicated in causing skeletal muscle frailty earlier in life than you might expect. And maybe looking back, even less endurance-type play during childhood and adolescence is linked to an increased risk of earlier death later in life.
That's a really extensive list. It touches pretty much every major system in the body: heart, metabolism, muscles, bones, brain, even things like cancer risk and pain. So how do these sources suggest sitting might actually cause these problems? Is it just about not burning calories, or is there something else happening sort of under the hood biologically?
The papers do touch on several potential biological mechanisms. It's not just a lack of calorie burn. They propose that sedentary behavior might, for instance, decrease how well your muscles take up glucose from your blood, which can contribute to insulin resistance. It might also promote that low-grade inflammation we talked about, partly from the fat accumulation, and potentially reduce the production of nitric oxide, which is really important for keeping blood vessels healthy and flexible. These biological pathways are thought to be distinct from simply the energy balance side of things, calories in, calories out through activity. But the sources are also careful to point out that we still need more human research to fully understand these specific biological mechanisms. How exactly does sitting itself trigger these changes? That's still being investigated.
That makes sense. Complex problems usually have complex, kind of multi-layered biological causes. It's rarely just one thing. So bringing this all back to you, the listener, maybe standing up now, maybe still sitting, what's the most important practical takeaway message from all these sources? What should people focus on?
I think the clearest message, the one that's really strongly supported by the evidence reviewed here, is the recommendation to break up prolonged sedentary bouts. Aim to interrupt that sitting or lying time roughly every 30 to 60 minutes. Just get up, move around a bit. And beyond just breaking it up, try to limit your total amount of prolonged sedentary time each day as much as you feasibly can.
Right. And the sort of broader perspective, putting it all together,
the broader message, which is pretty evident across multiple papers here, is that for your best health, you should really strive for a combination of things. You want higher levels of physical activity, getting that moderate to vigorous exercise in. You want less total sedentary time overall, and you want to work towards better cardiorespiratory fitness. It's really about looking at your whole 24-hour day and trying to integrate movement throughout, not just thinking about, that 30-minute workout session in isolation.
This has been incredibly insightful, a real deep dive thanks to the fantastic sources our listeners send in. Thank you for guiding us through all that complexity.
Oh, my pleasure. I think the key insight these sources really offer is that sedentary behavior isn't just not exercising. It appears to be a real and distinct risk factor for a whole host of health problems. And while being physically active is hugely protective, these papers make it pretty clear that paying attention to how long and how often you're sitting still matters quite a lot too.
Absolutely. That distinction and the finding that even if you crush it at the gym, the rest of your day's sitting time still seems to have an impact. That's the real aha moment here.
Yeah, which kind of leaves us with an important question for you to think about as you go about your day. Given how deeply embedded sitting is in modern life, work, commuting, leisure, how might you intentionally look at your own daily environment, your routine, and find ways to consciously build in more movement and break up those long sedentary spells.
A really powerful thought to carry forward, maybe while taking a short walk around the room. Thanks for joining us on the deep dive.